collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up this week, we'll talk to the Minister of Health about the overuse of antibiotics in Cyprus.
We run programs which aim in educating our medical service providers, and not only the doctors but also the nurses and other paramedical staff.
Hear about the European Union's energy union policy.
We need finally to complete the work of the internal energy market where energies could flow freely among the member states.
And bird lovers are flocking to our wetlands to see a rare black flamingo.
Black flamingos are very rare. The first record that we know of was in Israel a few years ago, but this is only the second record of the black flamingo in Cyprus.
Cypriot farmers use more than 400 milligrams of antibiotics per kilo of livestock. Shockingly, that is 8 times the recommended limit compared to just 200 milligrams in the US and just over 50 in the UK. Joining us on the programme this week is the Health Minister, George Bambouridis. George, this is something that was addressed at great length in Brussels recently to mark Antimicrobial Resistance Day. And it is a worry. I've spoken in the past to members of the Medical Association here about the overuse of antibiotics in humans, but the worrying thing about antimicrobial resistance is that when we are, in a sense, consuming them through their veterinary use, then we're building up the possibility of a time bomb of resistance when these drugs are needed as a last resort in sick people. What is the view of the Ministry on this, and how can you do anything about it?
Well, let me start by clarifying that this falls under the jurisdiction of my colleague, the Minister of Agriculture. However, it is a matter of public health, so it did raise a red alert here at the Ministry. We called a meeting, we requested more information on this subject, and I've spoken to my colleague, Mr. Kouyalis, who is heading the Ministry of Agriculture, and we have agreed to form a joint task force which will address the point. Food safety comes under the Chemist General of the Republic, which is one of our centers of excellence here in Cyprus. They form an integral part of the EFSA, which is the European Food Safety Association. And indeed, Dr. Canaris, who is heading the Chemist General's office, she is the Chemist General, is doing a fantastic job, and we are very well equipped and very up to standard. So we need to coordinate with the Ministry of Agriculture in order to monitor this issue closely and make sure that there are no backdoors on antibiotics through any backdoors. You know, we cannot allow an indirect way of penetration of these antibiotics into the health system in Cyprus and the European Union.
Denmark and the Netherlands have really turned around their husbandry of livestock and cut back dramatically by, for example, banning farmers from actually keeping antibiotics on the farms, because some of them, as you know, are used as growth promoters. I think we have laws in Cyprus that suggest this shouldn't be done, but it probably still is being done. So would it be sensible maybe to make some regulation that antibiotics could only be prescribed by veterinarians and that records be kept?
Well, there are a number of ways to approach this. I think one should not just invest on creating legal or regulatory obstacles in the use of any antibiotics or things like that. One should also invest in educating the people involved in this field of agriculture. You need to make sure that people learn that unless they abide by the standards, their products will not be seen by the market as competitive. So if it boils down to money, and they know that if the monitoring of the whole operation will not eventually allow them to get away with it. They will eventually adopt
self-regulation.
Yes.
But then we come to the human aspect of this, which is much more your department's remit, and that is the fact that because for years Cypriots have thought that antibiotics are the answer to everything in humans, they probably don't even think about what we've just been discussing.
No, you'd be amazed. I mean, I was raised in a generation when most people were thinking that antibiotics are fine and should be taken for every illness that a child might come up with. Nevertheless, it is my generation which was raised with this preconception that was the one to reject antibiotics for our own children now. So I don't think the Cypriots I think they were just ill-informed. When the Cypriots are well-informed and they realize what the risks involved are, they would definitely be quite firm about it.
All right, you just said you don't really want more regulation in a sense, but of course a large number of people here don't use the government hospitals, where I'm assuming the ministry has a reasonable amount of control. They use private doctors. Now, how far can the Ministry of Health control or influence doctors working in the private sector who may be tempted to go along with a patient saying, I need antibiotics, just because it's easier?
You know what? Judging from the pediatrician of my children, he's in the private sector. He would never prescribe antibiotics. And my father also being a doctor of medicine from the private sector, I know that no doctor would risk the long-term or mid-term health of his patient in order to accommodate the requests of an ill-informed parent. I don't think...
All right, you're talking very much, though, about paediatrics. I'm talking just across the board, because the last interview I did with the Medical Association, when the last figures came out, it must have been a year or so ago, he freely admitted that they needed to educate doctors more because an awful lot of people were still prescribing unnecessary antibiotics. They weren't, as well, insisting that if they did prescribe antibiotics when they were needed, the patients finished the course, because that's another problem, isn't it?
Yeah, I suppose so. I'm not a scientist myself, but I do think that the medical profession being self-regulated, very much so as it is in other countries, it would be their task to keep their members well informed on all developments of the medical science. And it surprises me to see results like this, which indicate that in Cyprus we do consume a much higher percentage of antibiotics rather than other European partners. This indicates that obviously there is a problem and that the Medical Association is not doing its job properly.
So what can you as Minister do about that?
We do. We run programs which aim in educating our medical service providers, and not only the doctors but also the nurses and other paramedical staff. And it's a cultural issue, I suppose. But I don't know why the Medical Association is washing its hands off of this, if you're telling me what... I mean, I have no reason to doubt what you just said, but it does surprise me. I would think that the Medical Association would be
a little more proactive, perhaps?
Spearheading the whole effort, not just proactive.
And that is our Minister of Health, George Mamboridis, discussing the issue of antimicrobial resistance and the overuse of antibiotics here in Cyprus.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
The EU's Vice President for Energy Union, Maroš Šefčovič, was in Cyprus earlier this week as part of his Energy Union tour. After his contacts with government people and also academic institutions, he spoke to the press.
When we've been planning the visit to Cyprus, I didn't know how lucky I would be that I would be coming to Cyprus at the time where we see a lot of positive developments. We see that after very difficult structural reforms, the economy in Cyprus is picking up. The unemployment is gradually going down. I was very encouraged by meeting the political leaders yesterday and got a clear impression that there is strong effort being put on looking for the best possible outcome of the Cyprus issue. As you know, I had the honor to be received by the President of Cyprus, Mr. Anastasiadis, that I had a very interesting, important talk with Foreign Minister Kasoulides, and we discussed in a great detail all elements of the energy union with the Minister of Energy, Lakatripis. And I also have to say that I was very much impressed by the possibility to meet both negotiators, Andreas Mavroyanis, whom I know from our previous collaboration in different positions, or in the diplomatic service, or in the EU structures, but also Mr. Ozdil Nami, because we had a very fruitful meeting yesterday where it was quite clear that both sides understand each other very well, and they are ready to look for the creative solutions which would bring the positive conclusions of the Cyprus settlement talks. I also would like to say that I came here to thank Cyprus for their support for the Energy Union, which is one of the top priorities of the Juncker's European Commission, because we felt that in the 21st century we really have to look at energy and climate in a different way. We have to see it as 5 very important dimensions which would reinforce each other, and where we need the progress in all of them. We need to have better energy security. We need finally to complete the work of the internal energy market, where energies could flow freely among the member states. That we need to proceed with the decarbonization of our economies, achieve much more in energy efficiency, and put much more focused impetus on research and innovation. And I had the chance to discuss all of these dimensions, not only with the political representatives, but also with the stakeholders. The meeting we had this morning, be it representatives of the business communities, but also head of research, representatives of universities, leaders of the renewable industry in Cyprus. And I was very much encouraged how much focus, ideas and attention is paid to this project. I think it's very important because, as I was explaining in all my meetings, this year for the Energy Union is a year of delivery. We promised that we would put on the table proposals which would cover 90% of what we promised we would do under the Energy Union umbrella, be it in the field of energy security, in the field of energy efficiency, be it as measures respecting our commitments and obligations we undertook in Paris, or be it in the field of redesigning the electricity market in Europe, which must be much better able to integrate renewables and to be really up to the challenges of 21st century. We discussed also a lot the new possible important role of Cyprus in the Eastern Mediterranean, especially in connection with the new discoveries of gas in this region, where it's quite obvious that these new discoveries and the way how they would be explored in the future could change to a great extent geoeconomics, but I would also say geopolitics of this region. Because thanks to Cyprus and a good partnership they developed over the years with Egypt, with Israel, with Jordan, we are now looking at the possibilities of the joint approach to the development of this newly found natural wealth in this part of Mediterranean, which I'm sure will be to the great benefit of the whole island, to the region. And because what I saw are the projections of the figures, of the quantities, of the volumes of the gas being discovered in Eastern Mediterranean, it could also be very important contributions to the energy security of Europe, because you know that here we are looking for opening more of the European market to the new suppliers of gas, of LNG, just to make sure that we will have better competition and better prices on the European energy market.
The EU's Vice President for Energy Union, Maroš Šefčovič, talking to the press in Nicosia earlier this week.
You can subscribe to the Cyprus News Digest on iTunes for free and get the program downloaded to your phone or tablet so you can listen anytime, anywhere.
In other news this week, the Finance Minister, Haris Georgiades, has said he's optimistic about the prospects of the economy and said that Cyprus wouldn't require a new bailout package after completing its programme in about 2 months' time, even if it fails to privatise the state-owned telecoms company, CETA. Well, all eyes are on the unions because the Electricity Authority of Cyprus are also up in arms about even the government's backtracking from privatisation to what is called the legal unbundling of the state power company. And strikes have been threatened, talks are ongoing, but the government appears to have caved in to union pressure. And a lot of people here are wondering where we go next on this. Back to the Finance Minister, he's also promised that new rules which are coming into effect as of January next year will effectively mean that tax evaders can be caught. The new rules are designed to lead to greater cooperation between member states on tax matters and to act as a deterrent from using tax rulings as an instrument for tax abuse. There are literally millions of euros that the government is hoping to collect from people who have so far evaded the taxman. Also of interest to a lot of people who are waiting for the upcoming parliamentary elections is who will be nominated for the ruling DC party. 2 of their MPs have openly flouted the law of the land, and people are waiting to see whether or not the party will strike them off the upcoming list of candidates. Several people have told me that if they don't, well, they're showing great disrespect to the voters. It's something we'll be watching closely.
In collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
The biggest achievement of Crime Stoppers has been the ability of the public to be able to give information about crime anonymously.
There's no way I could have kept prostituting without the drugs. There's no way I could have had my body used like a public toilet, because that's actually what prostitution is.
And then the 4th series I started 3 days after I'd won the Oscar, so the whole of the Monarch of the Glen experience was all interplatted with the Gosford Park Oscar experience.
I was working with Ronnie James Dio, and David was going to reform Whitesnake in 2003.
Cyprus was chosen because Cyprus is a stable, peaceful and secure place.
We have to really look closely. What are we doing with children? What are we doing with adolescents? And what are we doing with adults that can help them move into a more literate situation?
The ones that I'm proudest of are the ones that were true discoveries, where we found something we didn't know existed.
If you go down to Larnaca or indeed to the Salt Lake in Akrotiri in the coming weeks, you will be feasting your eyes on our annual visitors, the flamingos. This year, literally thousands have flown in to spend the winter in Cyprus, and joining us to tell us where they come from and why they come here is Natalie Stylianou from BirdLife Cyprus. Why do they come here, Natalie?
So, flamingos come to Cyprus to spend their winter here. So they're wintering grounds. They choose our wetlands. So as you mentioned, primarily the Larnaca Salt Lakes and the Akrotiri Salt Lake, but also Oroklini. They also go there to spend their winter.
And how long do they stay here? What are they doing here and where are they coming from?
Well, as I said, they come here to spend their winter. As opposed to other countries, our wetlands in Cyprus do not freeze. So they come to Cyprus to spend their winter. They could be coming from Iran, Turkey, France, any of these countries. And as I said, they come here exactly to spend their winter at our wetlands.
they eat, what, the shrimp in the lake?
Yes, that's right. They eat the shrimp, or they also eat worms and other invertebrates. And this is also, well, the shrimp are responsible for their colour, as we know, which is what they're quite famous for as well. I think it's interesting to note that younger flamingos are actually of a greyish colour. So if you notice this difference, it's because they're younger birds, and they get this pink reddish colour by up to the age of 4.
According to what they're eating, basically.
Yes.
And what about the black flamingo? This caused a stir last year when I think it arrived, and there's been a much bigger stir this year when everybody's saying it's back. This time it's at the Akrotiri Salt Lake, I think it was last year. Did they come to the same spot each year?
Well, what we can tell you is that black flamingos are very rare. The first record that we know of was in Israel a few years ago, but this is only the second record of the black flamingo in Cyprus. It's back because they're loyal to their group, so to speak, and flamingos generally find safety in numbers. Flamingo groups are referred to as colonies or flocks.
And why would one flock go to Akrotiri and the other to Larnaca and the other to Oroklini?
Basically, they go where they find the conditions that they need, the right depth of water. It shouldn't be too deep or too shallow, the food that they need. So that's how...
But it's not to do with where they're coming from. For example, if they're coming from France, the first landfall that suits, if you like.
I'm not sure about this, but I know that they do travel between salt lakes, or Larnaca Salt Lake and Oroklini Lake.
Oh, so they do move around while they're here. Now, I know that the Larnaca tourism people have also got a competition going on, inviting people to go and photograph the flamingos.
That's right.
Have you got any tips for photographers? You're the bird people. What is this sort of thing you would think people should be looking for if they're going to go and take a photograph of these, let's face it, magnificent birds?
No, they are very stunning birds. Well, first of all, we have to say we put in first place the welfare of the birds. So we always have to keep our distance to make sure that we're not disturbing the birds or their habitats. So that would be a primary concern for anybody. Also bird watchers, not just photographers.
But is there something that you would say typifies a flamingo?
Well, I would say that flamingos are quite stunning when they're in flight because they're such a long bird. So to see them in the air is quite something different, I would say, maybe, rather than... Although also standing in lakes are quite interesting to watch, to eat, how they communicate with one another. I think it's very interesting to just observe. I had a very interesting experience actually watching a video of a very dedicated photographer who's a member of BirdLife Cyprus. He had sent us a video of a flamingo standing up, and it never occurred to me how a flamingo stands up if it's sitting down. So I found this very interesting because they put weight on their sort of bill on the ground and they push their body up. And this never occurred to me, how they would stand up.
So they must have pretty muscular necks as well to take that a little bit of extra effort. And what about the breeding season? Do they breed here, or is that when they go back to their summer grounds?
That's right. They go back when they migrate in spring. They go back to their breeding grounds. They have attempted to breed in Cyprus, but unsuccessfully as far as we know. And they usually leave over summer. So this is why we only see them here in the winter, although... Last year, small numbers had stayed over the summer in Oroklini. But again, it depends on the conditions that they find.
It also seems extraordinary to me that in many cases, birds that migrate such long distances seem to have an inherent knowledge of what's at the other end and whether they should stay put a bit longer or leave a bit earlier. I mean, what's that down to?
Well, in the case of flamingos, it's also a bit of a mystery. I mean, it's very interesting that you mention this because flamingos may sort of, let's say, wander until they find the right conditions and then they land. Because even in Cyprus, seemingly, only days after the lakes have reached the right depth of water, they magically appear. So for flamingos, we don't have an answer for this. Of course, this doesn't mean that they don't meet surprises on this challenging journey of migration. So it's important for us also to take care of the habitats that these birds rely on and make their journey as, well, safe as possible.
Which brings us to something that we spoke about, I think, a couple of years ago, and that was this plan to have safe corridors for migrating birds. How's that coming on?
Well, protecting the migratory flyways remains a very important task. And this is something that BirdLife also works towards, because one very big challenge that birds face, and a very Cypriot one, unfortunately, is illegal trapping. So our efforts continue to tackle this very persistent and very serious problem.
Fortunately, our trapping methods, and I think we've had very rare cases of flamingos being shot. I know it has happened once or twice in the past, but generally speaking, they are respected by our hunting fraternity, aren't they? You don't see hunters going out and shooting flamingos.
To my knowledge, there haven't been such instances.
And a few years ago we had problems, of course, in the Salt Lake because there were lead pellets there and we had flamingos dying. That's all been sorted now? It's all safe for them now?
Yes, the shooting range there has closed, and from what I know, the lake has been cleared as much as possible from the lead pellets, and to our knowledge it's okay now there. So this is no longer a risk.
All right, we did say, or you did say earlier, that you're never sure when they're going to go because it depends on so many other conditions. But roughly how long would you think that people have got the chance to go down to these salt lakes and see them? They're usually here for what, a couple of months?
Well, they're usually here for the winter, as we said. But again, last year we had a small number staying in Oroklini over summer. But I would say that maybe now that it's at this great numbers, I think it would be much more impressionable to see them in such great numbers.
So, Natalie, if somebody does want to go and see this phenomenon, what's the best way to go about doing it?
So if somebody's interested to see the black flamingo that we have visiting at the moment, I would suggest going to the Agrodiri Environmental Center, which looks onto the Agrodiri Salt Lake, and they also have telescopes. So you can't miss the flamingos with the help of that equipment.
Is it open all the time?
For the opening hours, I think it would be best to check their website, which unfortunately I don't know of by heart. But if you Google Agrodiri Environmental Center, you should be able to find all their contact details and opening hours.
And what about the other two venues? Because there are places, I think, that people can, hides, if you like, where they can sit and undisturbingly watch.
Mm-hmm. So the other place would be the Oroklini Lake. There's a hide which is on the side of the highway, so it's difficult to miss. Where also you can find information on other birds that might be wintering at the lake. And also, of course, at the Larnaca Salt Lake, there's a hide near the Teke, if I'm not mistaken.
That's Natalie Stylianou from BirdLife Cyprus, talking about the massive influx of flamingos that we've had on our wetlands in Cyprus this year. And don't forget, if you look for the Larnaca tourism site online, you'll find the details of a photographic competition, so you can, kill two birds with one stone. Enjoy the birds in their habitat, and if you take some photos, you may win yourself a prize as well. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.